तमसो मा ज्योतिर्गमय तमसो मा ज्योतिर्गमय तमसो मा ज्योतिर्गमय तमसो मा ज्योतिर्गमय।
पंजाब विश्वविद्यालय तेरी शानो शौकत सदा रहे, मन में तेरा आदर मान और मोहब्बत सदा रहे। पंजाब विश्वविद्यालय तेरी शानो शौकत सदा रहे।
तू है अपना भविष्य विधाता, पंख बिना परवान सिखाता, जीवन पुस्तक रोज पढ़ाकर सही गलत की समझ बढ़ाता।
जीवन पुस्तक रोज पढ़ाकर सही गलत की समझ बढ़ाता।
तेरी जय गौ शंख बजाए,
रोशन तारे बन जाए,
बखरी तेरी शोहरत, तेरी शोहरत सदा सदा रहे।
विश्वविद्यालय तेरी शानो शौकत सदा रहे। पंजाब विश्वविद्यालय तेरी शानो शौकत सदा रहे।
तमसो मा ज्योतिर्गमय तमसो मा ज्योतिर्गमय।
कुंडेनु तुषार हार धवला, या शुभ्रवस्त्रावृता, या वीणावर दंड मंडित करा, या श्वेत पद्मासना, या ब्रह्माच्युत शंकर शङ्करा प्रभृतिभिः देवै सदा वन्दिता सा मां पातु सरस्वती भगवती निःशेषजाड्यापहा शुक्लां ब्रह्म विचारसार परमा आद्यां जगद्व्यापिनीं वीणा पुस्तकधारिणीम् अभयदाम् जाड्यान्धकारापहम् हस्ते स्वाटिकमल्लिकां विदधतीं पद्मासने संस्थितां वन्दे तं परमेश्वरीं भगवतीं बुद्धिप्रदां शारदाम् बुद्धिप्रदां शारदाम्. Thank you.
ओमित्येकाक्षरं ब्रह्म व्याहरन् मामनुस्मरन् यः प्रयाति त्यजन् देहं स याति परमां गतिम्. With this invocation to Omkar, on the behalf of Department of Philosophy, I welcome the speaker and the participants on YouTube and on this platform to the study circle Elenchus, which is sponsored by ICPR New Delhi. The study circle aims at minimum 12 lectures on experimental philosophy and philosophical counseling. As we know that these are comparatively younger branches of philosophy, hence the aim is to gain more clarity about the nature, concerns, and methodology of these branches of knowledge. In our last lecture, Professor Ran Lahav shared the idea of deep philosophy and suggested a rule-free rule in order to traverse the journey of an individuality, of one's own individuality. Professor Beena Isaac connected the roots of counseling to the ideals of the yoga philosophy. In the series, we have with us today Dr. Rajeevan, who did his graduation from Calicut University, postdoctorate from Kannur University on yoga and psychoanalysis, the dynamics of transcending the present. And it's a pleasant surprise to know that he did his post-graduation from Panjab University, Department of Philosophy from Panjab University. He has also completed his postdoctorate on Wittgenstein and Shankar's Vedant. And since 2012, he is serving at Government Brennan College, Thalissar, and is actively engaged in philosophical counseling. It comes as a surprise to us while we get to know that he has spent significant 18 and a half years of his life at uh, in the Air Force as a technician, as a missile technician, I would say, to be more specific. It is a delight to invite you, Dr. Rajeevan, and the floor is all yours. And I'm very hopeful that while we, along with you, deliberate on philosophical counseling and philosophy in counseling, we will be enriched and enlightened. Thank you so much for coming and taking out your time.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you for the introduction. And before getting into the topic, I must express my gratitude towards the Department of Philosophy, Panjab University, or the HOD, Dr. Shivani Sharma, and the staff, and Piyush E, as well as the Indian Council of Philosophical Research. For me, it's a home return. From Panjab University, I completed my MA as a private candidate, of course. As well as my PhD has begun from Panjab University under Dr. Sebastian. Professor Sebastian is now present here. It's a pleasant moment for me. Now, the topic today is philosophical counseling and philosophy in counseling. And my practice is not specifically in philosophical counseling, but it is in psychological counseling, a small correction, or counseling in general. And not only counseling or the use of words, verbal counseling, but also in psychotherapy. So this counseling and psychotherapy are done with a background of philosophy. I'm basically trained in philosophy, and my interest I was brought to philosophy through the reading of Elenchus, Bhagavad Gita, and my interest was in yoga and Vedanta. Later on, the interest got transformed into Buddhism, Taoism, and Zen. And maybe because of the lack of knowledge in counseling, I started using some insights from philosophy, because I found that many of the tools which I knew were insufficient. And later on, I came to know, for my surprise, that many of these tools are used in CBT. That's a new version, the third wave of CBT, which began after 2000s. So mainly the Buddhism, Taoism, all these things are utilized in CBT as a tool. So I found that there is a intimate connection between philosophy and counseling. And the philosophical elements were running throughout the counseling process. So where we can classify them as philosophical counseling and psychological counseling became a problem for me. And this is the background from which I am talking. So in this presentation, I'll be going through these areas. First, I'll be getting into the nature of counseling, as counseling is common for the term counseling is common for philosophical counseling as well as psychological counseling. Then I'll be listing the problems addressed in counseling, the list of problems addressed in counseling. Then I'll be looking into the nature of solution. And when I speak all these things, the problem addressed, nature of solution, my list will not be an exhaustive one, because there are hundreds of counseling techniques. And the problem varies from the most mundane to the most spiritual. So I'll be taking some elements which are useful for my presentation only. It will not be an exhaustive one. You can refer other sources for other models also. Then I'll be going to the role of counselor in counseling, what the counselor actually does in counseling. Then I'll be just going through some of the counseling techniques. And finally, I'll be revisiting all these 5 points from the standpoint of philosophy, and especially from an Eastern perspective. Okay, now coming to what is counseling. The counseling, as I told earlier, is common for philosophical counseling as well as psychological counseling. And generally, all problems related to everyday life is addressed. And that's what philosophical counseling also claims. The problems of everyday life is addressed from a philosophical standpoint, referring to the meaning of life and meaning of existence, all these things. And whenever we think about the problems of everyday life, it's a sort of suffering. As Buddha told, the life itself is suffering. And we can say that much of the thing, what we call suffering, is psychological in nature. In the sense that there are physical sufferings. But rather than physical suffering, we create suffering through our thoughts or our imagination. I don't deny there are physical suffering. Say, for example, if I got a scar on my face, the physical pain will be less. But the pain about the future, tomorrow what people will think of me, what explanation I'll give, all these things will makes me some sort of, or it will create some sort of anxiety in me. And that will be more if I'm more concerned about beauty. So, what I mean to say is that even though physical suffering is there, the way we look into suffering determines the gravity of suffering, how much we suffer. It's not only a physical one, but also mainly psychological one. And this counseling apparently is focused on problem solving. And it was a criticism against psychological counseling in the previous lectures also, in that it addresses the problem solving, but philosophical counseling addresses some sort of meaning. But there is an addition to that, that even though it's apparently focused on problem solving, largely counseling aims at the empowerment of the client. Client is the person who is subjected to counseling. And it's a process of learning. It's not only that you solve one problem and get out of that problem. No, it's a learning about how we can solve the problem. So I'll be referring to some cases and I'll make the case description as brief as possible because of the want of time, because I'll be quoting some 7 or 8 cases. So I'll just simplify it. And I'll take only that element. I'll not be referring to the whole story. I think 3 years back, there was a client, a 10th standard, 15-year-old girl as a client for me. And she was having an uncontrollable anger. And she used to beat her sister. And also the anger, even it gets sublimated to some other activity. Sublimation is the process through which you express something which is in a socially expressible manner. She used to sweep the ground and all. So it gets sublimated. That much uncontrollable was the anger. And after initial discussions and some sort of early recollection process, I found that there was a trauma at the age of 5 when she was studying in the 1st standard. And also when she was studying in the 6th standard, 5 years later. The similar kind of trauma. I'm not getting into the details of that. Then, subsequently, she was taken for therapy. In psychotherapy, in that case, was to re-experience the trauma. I'll be getting into that notion later on again. Re-experiencing means it's because we reject that trauma. It's because we do not accept that trauma that the trauma is able to control me even now. And in this case, the girl was not consciously aware of that. She had forgotten that trauma, these 2 traumas. And the 1st standard one was a severe one. Then I made her to re-experience the trauma in reliving experience, what we call reliving, not reliving, reliving of that experience. And she was subjected to that trauma again and cured that. There was to cure only one trauma that happened in 1st standard. The next one will automatically get cured. And that happened too. Not only that, in future also, if there is some such events, then she will be able to manage. So counseling is not only the process of solving a particular problem, but also the process of learning how to solve problem. And it leads to self-empowerment. So what we can call counseling is an empowerment. It leads a person to empower himself or herself to face the realities of everyday life. Otherwise, it's not the problem. The problem solving is very easy for a counselor. If a counselor is rich, and if a client is facing some financial problem, say 1 lakh rupees, give 1 lakh rupees, the problem is solved. Is it solved? I think it's not really solved. Because the problem with the client is not that he's not having 1 lakh rupees. Maybe his ways of spending or his spending more than what he earned is the problem. And he must be empowered to face that reality and overcome by his own. So it's a sort of learning. Now coming to the problems that are addressed in counseling, you can see a list of problems. It may be difficult to read out because I wanted to make it in one slide. It's not that important. The first one was alcohol and other drug addiction. Then eating concerns, the problem with self-esteem, the problem with body image, health issues, grief, loss of loved ones, relationship conflict, breaks up and all, and adjustment problem with other persons. Then anger management, as we have seen that in the earlier case. Then anxiety, stress, behavior, mood changes, gender identity, suicidality, existential issues, and even spirituality. What else is left in the world? I do not know. So I think the problem can be, it's a range of problems that can be addressed through counseling. I'm not telling about a particular counseling technique, but counseling as a whole. And the problem ranges from mere social issues, that's interpersonal relationship and other issues, the personal issues, the managing oneself, even the physical issues, in the sense that the problem, and those who are facing problem with cardiac problems or obesity, there are CBT techniques. CBT means cognitive behavior therapy techniques, which can help the person to overcome such issues. It's a supportive treatment. And it can be for the for the mental issues, and it can be for the intellectual issues, and also for the spiritual issues, the spiritual dissatisfaction, what we normally study. So the problem ranges from the social to the spiritual, or the purely mundane to the spiritual, the purely empirical to the spiritual one. So there's a range of problems that can be addressed in counseling. Then it becomes important that how the solution is coming. So we'll move on to the nature of solution that are taken up in this program. And the first is behavioral modification. That's a behavioral therapy technique. A simple example is usage of timetable. You can make a timetable and adhere to that, then take a feedback on that, then modify yourself. This more most of you are from philosophy. You might have studied behaviorism as a philosophical subject. And the second aspect is accepting of others, the acceptance of others. And there is a CBT therapy which is known as ACT, acceptance, commitment therapy. So acceptance is a mode of solving the problem, everyday problem. I'll just describe an example. There was a 22-year-old girl, was in her PG years, post-graduation years, and was having some existential crisis. And in psychology itself, the existential crisis, they say that the counselor requires so much of this philosophical as well as literature knowledge in literature in order to address these issues. Because often the client will be rationalizing more than the counselor. That makes the handling of existential issues somewhat complicated. And I'll just take a piece from that whole case study. That this student, she went for study to along his teachers and friends. And there was one of his roommates. And they were in some problem. There was some conflict between them. And they took a group photo with her roommate and teachers. And she was not able to tolerate that her roommate with whom she's angry is in that photograph. So what she did is that she sent the photograph, the digital photograph, to her uncle and got it digitally edited and removed that girl. And I just asked, why did this? I did not want to see her. Okay. Then are you satisfied with that? Or are you still governed by that? She has got a sort of satisfaction, but she was still governed by that previous image. Then through continuous discussion, she agreed that there is no forcing in counseling. Okay? She agreed that she will give the original photograph, the unedited photograph, to her friend. And she gave that, her roommate, and she gave that. And she was relieved of all the tensions. So it's because we reject reality. It's because we reject certain truth that we end up in some sort of mental difficulties. So acceptance is one mode of solution. Then another is getting insight into one's own nature. Okay? To understand myself, how I appreciate situation, will be a guide to accept myself. For example, there's a student, a boy, was short and black. And he has so much of inferiority about that. Then in one session, I asked him, how you treat others? Do you treat them as something inferior if somebody is black or short? He told no. Then constantly reflecting on that thinking, he got some relief. Then there were some other follow-ups done on that. But to understand one's own self, one's own nature, will give some sort of release in some problems. Then another way is to understand our uniqueness, that I'm unique. There's nobody in the world who can substitute my position. This understanding uniqueness, this will end all sort of comparison. If it's practiced in its true sense, there are difficulties in practicing all of these things in its true sense, and in that issue we'll come back later. And another mode is that of detachment. I'll take an example of detachment later on. Now I'll just leave it. Detachment in the sense we talk it in Vedanta and or the Indian traditions. The same detachment is practiced in counseling also, psychological counseling also. Then another method is understanding and accepting the realities of world and oneself. Accept the reality. The moment you reject reality, you are going to fight with reality. You are going to struggle. And that also will take later on. I'm just listing the natural solutions. And the next method is letting go. Non-judgmental, passive observer. Just observe the thing and let what you lost go. If there is a relationship conflict, if there is a breakup, mostly the solution which is mostly used is something like letting go. Just allow them to be free, let them go. So that can, if you cling on to that previous issues, if you cling on to your previous demands, then you ought to suffer. Nothing is going to change in the world. So letting go is one of the means through which we can get out of the suffering caused by relationship issues and all. Now coming to the role of counselor. What the counselor is actually doing in counseling. Is he just advising? I think nobody will tolerate advice. Because nobody considers himself or herself as something incapable of deciding for themselves. Everyone does their own rights. So nobody will take advice normally. Unless there is some other pressure that he's an employer or his teacher and I got my assignment to be signed, like that. Otherwise, advice is very difficult to materialize. So what the counselor does is that an unconditional acceptance is done. See, without any value judgment. The moment you judge the client, you fail to be a counselor. We will not like anybody to judge us. Rather, we like others to accept us. And if counseling is all about transforming an individual, empowering an individual to meet their reality, then before transforming, there must be an acceptance. I'll tell a case, just a short case. A client, again a girl, who during her final year of graduation got in contact with a boy with some 100 kilometers away. And after some chats, she sent some nude photos to him. And later on, he was just blackmailing. He was telling that I'll flash these photographs, I'll put it in social media. So she was telling that she's sent the nude photograph. So how will I look at her as an ordinary man? Is it good? So if I start judging like that, then I fail to be a counselor. What we need to do is that the empathetic understanding of the client. And by that empathetic understanding, we'll be getting into the client's mental frame and we'll be able to think and feel what the client feels. Often we'll be able to tell the client what the client is feeling. It says, when I say this, attending a client in its true sense is sort of meditation. Just observe what the client is saying, not only saying, but all gestures even. You've got a lot of things to learn from gestures. There was a student, a boy, who came to me, or he was sent to me. And that's something to do wrong with counseling, because counseling is to be accepted voluntarily. Nobody can force someone else for counseling. And this boy was sent by his teacher, and he was having some drug addiction problem. And the teacher told me, let's say, keep. And I told, what's your problem? I don't have a problem. Then slowly, after say 15-20 minutes, I slowly ended the issue. It's a drug problem. He was telling no. When his mouth tells no, his hand tells yes. So body language is one of the most important thing in counseling. We can observe conflicts. And that is the case in which I observed maximum conflicts. The mouth is telling something else and the body is telling something different. So by observing, it's a meditative observation. That's what I mean to say. If you need to do it in a true sense, it's a meditative observation. And that through that observation, what you do is you get into the client's frame, mental frame, so that we can understand them with empathy. We can even feel. Even there are occasions in which we tell them that, are you feeling like that? The answer will be mostly yes. There may be errors. It can happen. And another role of counseling is to keep confidentiality. And with that promise of confidentiality that the client is going to open up. And it's through that opening up itself, some amount of the problem will be cured. That's one element in psychoanalysis, that's talking cure. Through talking, or what they say, catharsis. Telling whatever is coming to your mind. Much of your problem will be solved. But there must be one guarantee that the counselor should not be ringing his or her father or some relatives or some friends and telling that he has got this problem. That should not be done. And the communication between counselor and client cannot go beyond. It's within that four walls, not beyond them. And that much confidentiality. And to the best of my knowledge, it's that genuineness from the part of the counselor himself or herself that gives him or her the strength to get into the client, to understand the client. And through this empathetic understanding and unconditional acceptance, the counselor can get a rapport with the client. And the client becomes the counselor becomes someone who is most important in his life. who can understand him, who can accept him, and who knows how to solve his or her problem, the client's problem. And that position is known as transference. The client becomes a child and the therapist becomes a parent. Often it happens. And the therapist takes the role of a guide, we can say. We'll revisit it later on. The therapist or counselor, I use it interchangeably. Before that, I'll just say the difference between therapy and counseling. To be frank, there's not much difference. But the counseling emerged as a part of humanistic psychology. We'll come to that later on. And even before that, there was therapeutic techniques like psychoanalytic methods or psychodynamic methods. And there are tools in counseling also, there are tools, therapeutic tools. But we use pure counseling when we do only through words, we the talking here. Whereas if you use some other technique, then we can call it therapy. There is not much difference. That's why I use it interchangeably. Okay, now coming to the types of counseling. There are different types of counseling. It's psychodynamic. That's after Freud. That talks about some psychic forces acting within the individual. That's why it's known as psychodynamic. And what I told talking here was a part of that. And in psychodynamic counseling, insight gives the cure. The insight into one's own mental state gives the cure. And Freud often refers to unconscious, or for him the all problems are unconscious problems. And when we are aware of what is there in unconscious, and it's not that easy, there's some techniques to analyze and bring out what is there in unconscious, like say dream analysis, word association, or catharsis. Like that techniques you use, and you get into the unconscious, and if you are aware of, if you get insight into your own problem, in the problem, the symptoms are reduced. And there is Adler, that's Freud's disciple, and Carl Jung, who took the psychotherapy to a mystical level. He's a Swiss psychiatrist, and who took psychotherapy to a mystical level. And there are behavioral techniques that use, like behaviors and conditioning are used. Then systematic desensitization is used. If you're not, it's used for phobia mainly. Will systematically desensitize the person towards that stimuli. And through that, mostly they are learning techniques. There was a boy as a client for me who was having an exam fear. And whenever the fear will start the day before exam itself, some sort of anxiety, form of some sort of anxiety. And it culminates in the inability to write exam in the exam hall. When he gets the question paper, he will not be able to write the exam. And what I did was, I was taken to a visualization, and slowly we'll classify the stimuli, we'll classify in degrees, and from small degree onwards, we'll be desensitized step by step. And luckily, I could get him just 2 days prior to the exam, and it was tested in the next exam itself, and there was much relief. And the further learning will take place later on. I did it some 4 years back. And another technique is cognitive methods, which includes CBT. CBT is cognitive behavior therapy, which includes the behavioral element also, cognitive element also. Then REBT, rational emotive behavior therapy, where you use reason. Here's some sort of logic and all counseling. It's not only what I'm going to tell, the Indian philosophical techniques, but also some sort of logic can be used. And this girl, my client, was the main, and he had many other relationships. She could not accept that. And also, she could not leave him. She was that emotionally attached to him. So she could not leave him. So what I would do is to carry out a session of REBT. It took almost 40 minutes, I think. I asked her what he wants, what do you think? Like that, step by step, we'll ask questions. And finally, she declared that the original person is not the one who I love. I love a different person. I'm mistaken. And this is an awareness. And she got a blank. And she was confused. No, I was not loving that boy. I was loving someone else who was created in my own imagination. So that's how REBT is taken up. And just giving some elements only. I'm not going through the whole process, or I'm not trying to make you aware of the whole thing. I'm just listing it. The other method is, excuse me, the humanistic method or the existential counseling, in which, as I told earlier, the client will be having so many intellectual issues or about the meaning of life, the meaning of existence, all these things, which we can take up. Where mostly the talking cure will do, but that's a technique. And another technique is Gestalt, where you understand the life holistically. The earlier what I told about that trauma case, the reliving, really experiencing that thing, was a sort of Gestalt therapy. And when you see the types of counseling, you can see that there are cognitive, emotional, as well as coping nature. They're either cognitive nature, or they're emotional nature, or they're coping with the problems in life. That's a classification. Now, I'll be revisiting these 5 elements from a philosophical point of view. Now, why from a philosophical point of view? That's the first problem. Okay. So we have classified psychology as an empirical science. And whether philosophy is empirical or not is a large question. Most of us desire that it's, or we like to opt that it's a priori. Philosophy deals with a priori. Or the conditions for the empirical, conditions for the existence of the empirical. How empirical is possible, that's what philosophy is. And if you want to explore more on the empirical, and that's necessary in counseling definitely. If you want to explore more on the empirical, you require some theoretical understanding or the foundation of the empirical. And in counseling, what we do is that we understand the uniqueness of the client. Each and every client, each and every person in the world is unique, and their problems are unique, and the solution to their problem is unique. And if that's the case, then we have to formulate different techniques or the combination of technique for different individuals. And that's happening. We cannot mechanically apply some counseling techniques in counseling. We cannot apply tools blindly in a client. It may be successful to some degree, but if you want to do it effectively, the method is called eclectic method. Eclectic method, that you use the combination of techniques that's suitable for a client. And in order to use that, you must have some understanding of the theoretical foundation of all these techniques, as well as you should be able to theorize for the client. And that happens not intellectually, that happens spontaneously from the mindset. And this, much of the problems that we address today in counseling was addressed earlier in religion and culture. And the role of religion got changed when the society got changed, and the culture got changed through the passage of time. Now counseling has emerged as a separate discipline. So otherwise these things were happening knowingly or unknowingly in our tradition and culture. And here in the second half, I'm trying to bring out those elements based on the Eastern wisdom. How far, whatever we are revisited the 5 points, how far the elements of Eastern wisdom are hidden. I don't mean to say that they are substrate from Eastern wisdom, no. But this was embedded in our culture. That's what I want to say. And when we talk about the evolution of this counseling in psychology, you can say that the psychology as a separate discipline emerged at the end of 19th century. And then came the treatment technique known as psychoanalysis of Sigmund Freud, which was purely deterministic, because Freud was much influenced by the current scientific developments, like law of conservation of energy. And he thought that there are some sort of psychic energy, that's why psychodynamism, and that energy is to be conserved, cannot neither be created nor be lost. The psychic energy also can neither be created nor be lost. So there is a purely deterministic explanation in psychoanalysis. But he presupposed some mind, some structure of mind, some structure of personality, something which is unconscious, something which is conscious, and all these things. Then came the next movement in psychology, that's behaviorism. In behaviorism, the notion of mind was discarded. Then what we call mind or mental states was explained only in terms of stimuli-response relationship. And dissatisfied this, and this too also was highly deterministic. Behaviorism also was deterministic. And humanistic psychology by Maslow and Rogers, Carl Rogers and Abraham Maslow, emerged in 1930s as a revolt against, as a third force in psychology, as a revolt against both the psychoanalysis and behaviorism, where human beings are capable of self-development and they are unique and they have got the individual freedom. And asserting the individual freedom and the capacity to develop, the humanistic discipline, humanistic psychology emerged. And some points I'll just refer with regard to humanistic psychology, and I'll relate how it's closely related. And from humanistic psychology, it's from humanistic psychology that how counseling emerged as a separate branch. Now, how far it's rooted, or how far there are elements of Eastern wisdom in humanistic psychology. One aspect of humanistic psychology is that, according to that, every individual is unique and has unique forms of development and growth. Everybody is unique. And there is a possibility of self-development. And where the self-development culminates, what Maslow calls self-actualization. Self-actualization is to use one's own potency in its full capacity and put it into action. That's for social service mostly. Something which is akin to our karma yoga. And Maslow modified his theory of needs, and he later on added 3 needs, out of which the peak one was that of not self-actualization, but the need for peak experience, the ultimate freedom, what we often call moksha. And they claim that the nature, the capacity to realize that, the capacity to realize ultimate freedom is within that individual itself. And that's what Advaita told. That's what Jainism says. The soul has got infinite potentialities, that 4 types, something like that. And that's what Buddha told. And what they say is that given suitable, that's the humanistic psychology says that given suitable understanding and environment, they can progress in their own paths. Just give them the way, they have got the capacity. Related to something like Satkaryavada in Indian tradition. The potency is you show the path, it can grow its own. And it asserts the uniqueness of the individual. And because of the uniqueness of the individual, since I am unique, my path of self-development is also unique. So I cannot copy anybody. So I had to, or the counselor has to help me to realize my end through my own path. There is no predetermined path for me. And it leads to the impossibility of the effective applicability of a specific tool in total to a specific client. You cannot use any tool totally to a specific client because you have to use some eclectic method, as I told earlier, so that there is some combination of tools and techniques used for a client. And in counseling or in human psychology, the growth is client defined. There is no hierarchy. It's not that the counselor advises the client. It's not that the counselor forces the client. The moment there is force is applied, the relationship dies, the rapport dies. There are instances in counseling where we can apply some sort of force or where we can refute what we call, I just forgotten the name. Okay, I'll come back to that. So there is something that's because of the relationship with that rapport. You can confront this. You can confront the client. You can confront the client's conviction. And the client knows that the counselor is telling for the client's development only. But otherwise, there is no means prescribing or there is no forcing the client. The growth is client defined. On the counselor and client together, there is no hierarchies. Nobody is higher. The counselor is not somebody who knows everything or who can force the client to do something. Okay, so it ends, the humanistic tradition ends in self-actualization as the aim of or the ultimate need, and then to the need for peak experience. Now coming to the problems addressed. One problem addressed, we have seen that the problems addressed ranges from pure materialistic to that of highly spiritual. And this takes me to the notion of problems or the notion of steps that are taken in yoga. We have got 8 limbs in yoga: Yama, Niyama, Asana, Pranayama, Pratyahara, Dharana, Dhyana, Samadhi. The Yama related to the social concerns. Niyama related to personal concerns. Asana mainly related to body. Then pranayama related to vital force, mainly. Pratyahara related to mind, and dharana, dhyana, samadhi related to the spiritual realm. This is not a rigid one. There are overlapping. But these problems, the human existence is multidimensional. An individual exists in many dimensions like social, personal, bodily, vital, and the range of problems that you can see in counseling ranges from throughout all these existences. So, and if we see how problems are addressed in the context of Eastern wisdom, or we used to say that when we differentiate between Western philosophy and Eastern philosophy, we say that Eastern philosophy is somewhat related to empirical issues or it's closely related to religion. Yes, of course. We have got worldly problems. We have got mundane problems. We don't just prescribe solution to that. We get into the nature of reality, metaphysics, and for that we require epistemology. And we get into the nature of reality. What's the reality of self? What's the reality of world? How the world self is related to world? And from that understanding, and it's from that understanding, we prescribe the ethics. And in ethics, or in Indian ethics, we can see that there are 4 stages of development, or purusharthas, or 4 aims of life, varying in degree: kama, artha, dharma, and moksha. These problems addressed in counseling can be listed in this fashion: that it's related to your bodily problems, pleasure related. That's bodily problems or even sexual problems. All these things comes in kama. Artha, your earnings, that's related to your earnings. Dharma, that's your duty, social commitment, all these things. And moksha, the spiritual development. So this was already imbibed by our society, and there was so many methods in which these things are made into practice. But the contemporary society is not like that. So we require, I don't deny that we require counseling as a separate discipline, but much of these wisdoms are contained in our society. And earlier I told, we can know many things, but it's very difficult to realize that. We can understand that. Earlier when I talked about the inferiority case, the boy knows that yes, he's not underestimating a person, another boy who is black or short. But it's not that easy that he can be, or he can regain his superiority, or he can get away from his inferiority. It's not that easy. There needs to be a continuous contemplation of that reality. And this also we say that Sravana, Manana, Nididhyasana. After Sravana, we have got Manana, intellectual understanding, some rational insight. Then there must be a continuous meditation on that. And they are interdependent. It's through the continuous meditation of that reality, that intellectual reality, that you can realize that. And often we prescribe meditation. I use the term prescribe meditation to the client. And if you take the CBT triangle, cognitive behavioral therapy, they relate the feeling, thoughts, and behavior like this. And it's not that philosophical counseling cannot deal with feeling or emotion. It can only deal with the cognitive aspect. I think no. There is an interconnection. There is an interdependence between thought, feeling, and behavior. Our thought, if I think in a negative way, I'll be depressed. If I think in an optimistic way, I'll become happy. And whether I'm depressed or I'm happy determines the way I behave. And the way I behave also influences by thought. Or there are interdependencies, or all these three things are interdependent. So sometimes in depression it loops. It makes a loop that I got a negative thought, so that I'll think that nobody in the world requires me. So I'll go aloof. I'll sit in a corner. When I sit in a corner, the behavior will change. I'll not have much interaction with other people. When my behavior changes, when I do not have interaction with other people, the other people also will not interact. Then I will have more negative thoughts that nobody really requires me. Then I'll keep more aloof. So there is an interdependence. We can control our feeling or emotion with our thought as well as with our behavior. And in meditation, what we are doing is we are controlling our feeling directly. We are letting all thoughts go. We are trying to empty our mind through focusing one object or one thought or our breath or whatever way the meditation is taking place. And through that, we are just getting out of negative thoughts or negative feelings. And that will make our thought something positive. And that will make our behavior something acceptable. So it's possible that it's what is the feeling element or the emotional element and the thinking element, the cognitive element in the case of counseling. Now coming to again the nature of solution, the suffering and the ignorance, how they are related. Okay, now for someone to be counseled, they must have a minimum intellectual level. We cannot counsel everybody. If somebody is mentally retarded, low intellect, it's very difficult to counsel. It's less than 70 and or it's very difficult to counsel. And we know that in Indian tradition, the suffering is caused by ignorance, or we study that the suffering of bondage, the root cause is ignorance. And ignorance of what? It's the ignorance of true nature of reality. And what is reality? the world and the self. And of course, in some systems, ultimately the self. Or ultimately, there is no difference between self and world. So, ignorance of that interdependence, as mentioned in Buddhism, that interdependence of the desires something else to be real. So the ignorance of reality or reject reality. There is a Zen saying, it says that it's the cause of suffering is the rejection of reality. You're not a reality. You desire something else to be real. So the ignorance of reality or reject reality. There is a Zen saying, it says that it's your resistance to what is that causes you suffering. For example, I'm not as old as you think. Okay? But because of my beard and hair, the grey color, or rather the white color, I look older. What can you do? I had to suffer. I had to suffer that. Or I had to die. But I think it's better to die than die. The best way is to accept that this is real. Then this loses its power to influence my thought, influence my feeling, influence my behavior. The moment I resist that, I ought to suffer. So it's the resistance to what is that causes you suffering. And actually, in counseling is not aimed at changing the reality. It doesn't alter the reality. When I get out of the suffering of my white hair and beard, I'm not changing this reality, but rather I'm changing the way in which I'm looking into reality. I'm not changing. And there's again one Zen saying which says that before enlightenment, chop wood and carry water. After enlightenment, chop wood and carry water. The world in front of you and what you do doesn't change before enlightenment and after enlightenment. Before you gain knowledge and after you gain knowledge, you see the same world, you do the same thing. But the way you apprehend that, the way you look into the world changes. The world doesn't change. Just think of working in kitchen, for example. May not be a pleasurable one. But think of doing the same thing in kitchen when some of your close friend, best friend is coming as a guest. It will be something rewarding. The act is the same, but the way you look into that act determines whether you are going to enjoy it or suffer it. Just a minute. Okay, then in the same way, every individual is unique, as I told earlier, and every solution is unique. Now I'll tell another example, case, which I told that I'll mention during detachment, the detachment as a way to get out of suffering. So there was a mother aged 40 years around, and after the birth of the second child, the first child was studying in third standard, some say 8 years or so, and he has got a good reading in literature, and use words. He was well versed in using language, and because all the attention goes to the second child, he felt something that he was rejected. And this boy started blaming the mother in very good language, very good expression, that you deserve me to be dead, you do not want me in the world, and you are always cursing me like that. And the mother was continuously listening to this. The mother was not able to bear, and she was even contemplating on suicide to that extent. And the session took almost half an hour. counseling. I asked her, was the child right? She told no. I had to look after the one who depends me more. And you know that the child is wrong. And you also know that the child is a child. So what can you do? Nothing can be done. So actually, you have not done anything wrong. So he's not telling the you who is doing. He's telling the you who he understands. So witness his action as if you are sitting in a gallery and watching the game. You are not involving in the game. You are merely watching it. It's a sakshin actually. The notion of sakshin in Upanishads. Undagam. So, and detach yourself. And he's talking to that mother, not you. And whenever he does anything negative, don't respond. And whenever he does anything which is acceptable, just interact with him. Just giving an appreciation. And there was a drastic change in 1 week. The mother could do. There are actually two techniques used here. One is from my insight on the detachment technique, as well as there was an element of reinforcing for the child. Whenever he does something acceptable, he has admired, and whenever he did something which cannot be accepted, he has neglected. So, what I mean, the behavioral technique as well as the detachment, both are incorporated in one case. So that's why I told one need to use eclectic method in counseling. Coming to the next or last notion, that's the role of counselor. He's a guide, there's no doubt. And I would like to say that he's a guru. I don't say that whoever is putting a board counselor is a guru, but rather an ideal one is a guru also. Guru is the one who removes darkness and gives light. And you have to take your own path. He will not show you the path. He will show you, he will spread light, and you have to take your own path. And often, the client sees the counselor often as God. There were instances where they say that you are as good as God. It's because we could help them to save their life. We have not saved their life, we could help them to save their life. So it's that significant. It's not something mechanical that's happening in counseling. If you take it in a true sense, it's that significant that the counselor can do in the life of the client. And what actually happens in case of therapy or in counseling is that we show the path. As Wittgenstein told about philosophy, what is your aim in philosophy? To show the fly the way out of the fly bottle. You are not taking the fly out of the bottle. Just show the way. The fly will fly away itself. Just shed light. The client will take his or her own path. Now, the knowledge is important in that case. So it's through giving the knowledge of reality or to make the client to think about what's true and what's untrue. And it's through that we can take the client to a higher plane. Then there is another issue in case of client, and since the counselor becomes guide or guru, there is an element of transference which I told earlier. Then what happens is that the client sees the guru as upon whom he or she can completely depend. and sees as a father figure or some guru or even as God. And this dependency is a problem in counseling. And at times, the counselor may have a relationship with the client. That's possible if the client and counselor are of opposite sex and there are age difference. And depending on that, there may be a case of counter transference. But if the counselor is a true guru or true God in inverted comma, there cannot be a counter transference. The guru's emotions will not be affected by the disciple's emotion. The God's emotion will not be affected by the people's emotion. So countertransference is not accepted in counseling. The counselor is trained to overcome that. It's natural that he may fall in relation with the client, but the counselor is trained to overcome that. And the most important part in counseling is the termination. Termination of the counselor-client relationship. Through this termination, only the client can be freed. Like what Khalil Gibran told, the lip cannot give wings to the word which gave birth to it. Alone must it seek the ether. Alone and without the nest shall the eagle fly across the sun. The termination is the most important, where the client reaches ultimate freedom or the client gains ultimate freedom. Okay, now I think it's 1 hour is over about almost. Now we'll just make some final remark about what I had told till now. Now the problems, whatever I expressed related to counseling, ranges from pure material or pure empirical to the spiritual. And there were 2 or more cases in which I have even suggested Nirvana Sadagam to study. Nirvana Sadagam, I believe that is the apex of Vedantic philosophy, Advaita Vedanta. And even that helped me in counseling some clients. And another important thing is that we need to have psychological insight or psychological knowledge to understand the client's internal flow. Only through understanding the client that you can live the client's life and help the client to overcome the problem. So for that, you require so many techniques which are psychological also in nature. And we cannot do away with psychology and do purely philosophical counseling. That's what I claim. And also there is a need for studying the classification of mental illness. Because we do not know what the client is actually having. With our limited knowledge in philosophy, we cannot counsel a person. He may be, whatever he may present, he or she may present, maybe some superficial aspect of the problem. But the real aspect, it's not that every psychological problem is totally psychological or philosophical. Some are biological also. And if some stress, some depression, some anxiety, if it's biological, we may have to have psychiatric intervention before taking that client to counseling. In some cases where a patient is depressed, we will not be able to interact with the patient. If it's stress, anxiety, if the level is more than certain limit, we will not be able to interact with that client. Because, as I told earlier, for counseling, the client must have a minimum insight. He must be able to think. The cognitive ability should not be lost. And to bring the client to that level, that cognitive level, we may have to have the psychiatric intervention, some medicines required. And I'll tell one last example, in this case, in which a 20-year-old boy came to me. And so it was about 2 or 3 months after his father's death. And he was feeling guilt of that. He could not help his father and all these things. And we sat almost, it was the first session, sat for around 1.5 hours. I could not interconnect whatever he has told. And I felt that he is having some mental retardation. some low intellect. His speech was like that. He was obese. Then I was dissatisfied with that session. And I talked about his obesity. Why can't you control it? Why can't you have morning walk? He told that some excuses. He told some excuses. I just counted that. He told some other excuses. Then I counted that. He told some other excuses still. And I found that he's so clever. He may not have some intellectual problem. Then I referred him to a clinical psychologist. He was 22-year-old. And they did some psychometric analysis. And finally, they diagnosed that it was the beginning of schizophrenia. It's somewhat deadly to handle such cases as our own. So we should, as our potential, we should know our limitations also. As well as there must be a framework for counseling. In the earlier session also it was told. It's not that there is no way. Yes, ultimately there is no way. There is no particular path. There is no particular technique. But that doesn't mean there is no technique. There is no path. There is no specific path which can be prescribed to every client. But there is a path for each client. And the task of the counselor is to invent that or discover that rather. So, no path doesn't mean you can do anything. Because the quality of counseling is going to influence the quality of client's future life. As I told, counseling is a process of learning. And through that learning, the client is living to live the future life. And the intervention that we make as counselor is significant in this respect also. And this about the client, what I mean to say. The x-axis and y-axis. The x-axis you take as psychological or empirical x-axis. The y-axis is philosophical or theoretical. The client is the light blue line, the client's path. At every stage, you can see some values. You can be resolved into value in x-axis and value in y-axis. In real case, there may be empirical, philosophical, spiritual, religious, social, economical, all these things, biological, all these things. There are multi-axes. Then resolving a particular portion into x-axis and y-axis is my convenience. But as far as the client is concerned, it's a unique way. So we cannot divide a client's necessity into psychological or philosophical. Rather, we have to see that the client necessity is unique and where we require both psychology as well as philosophy. And whatever I told till now may be the ideal one. You may not get a counselor or the counselor-client relationship in this ideal way. The actual may be imperfect. But the imperfect even can transform the client to a certain extent. There is no doubt. It's not useless. But understanding the ideal is necessary to improve the actual. And that itself is the philosophy, what I want to say. Thank you so much. Thank you, one and all.
Thank you, Dr. Rajeevan, for a wonderful, lucid presentation and such an insightful talk. And I must say that a number of questions are overflowing on YouTube and here also. But let me just wind up by saying that the points, the core that you have touched with regard to philosophical counseling and psychological counseling. The most interesting point that I could see is that you have taken up the range of issues from social to spiritual, which I think are very valid. And again, to the problem, to the nature of solution, the role of counselor, types of counseling techniques that we can offer, and finally revisiting from the Eastern perspective. I think these are very significant steps and hierarchy that you have followed in order to explain the entire issue of philosophical counseling. And the most underlined point was that each I wouldn't say that patient, but the client is unique. He or she is a unique individual in himself or herself, and thus the path to his to the solution of his situation or her situation would be unique in its own course. And certainly, as you just rightly said, that the fly has to be shown the way out, and not you do not have to make the fly out of the bottle. It does not have to, you just have to create a way out of the bottle. That was the most significant message of your talk. And not only this, and of course, you related detachment with the Sakshi Bhav, the Drashta Bhav, and without being judgmental, when you try and understand the perspective of the client, that is one point which whereby we all will agree without a debate. And finally, you related it with the nature of suffering, which is certainly very significant in the philosophical debates. After all, the aim of philosophy and students of philosophy is to understand this very, throbbing entity named suffering. And very interestingly put, that resistance to what is suffering. So naturally, the moment you accept, but I have my reservation with regard to this definition, because critical understanding would not bow its head, once you have read a little bit of philosophy and you are let's see, not only a student of philosophy, but a little bit of rebellious in your own way. So critical thinking and venture would not let you easily submit to, accepting suffering as it is. And finally, the transference, and yes, certainly, and termination, and relating it to Bhagavad Gita, very significant. And now very quickly picking up 3 to 4 questions from YouTube, because we have audience there also. And then I would like rather to interact directly with our participants here on Google Meet. Let me just quickly pick up the questions from YouTube. Plenty of questions. I do not know how to just reconcile. Most of the people are asking the difference between philosophical and psychological counseling. I think that you have made very clear when you were talking about the X and the Y axis. If they, by that time, they have probably posted it, but you can collect the questions, because there is one very significant question that I can see is Murlidhar Sethi wishes to ask, sir, do you think the philosophical counseling is purely a cognitive enterprise? I think you just made it one point. Cognitive enterprise was just one point of your talk. And then there is Sanjay Karmakar. Sir, when a philosopher counsels a thought or a concept...
May I answer one by one?
Or you go ahead.
That will be easy, because I need not to remember. And as far as the philosophical and psychological counseling are considered, I think they vary in degree, not in type. Means the philosopher requires psychology also, the psychologist requires philosophy also, if you want to counsel. And it's a spectrum, varying from where more psychology is required, less philosophy. That's for the empirical issues. And if it goes to the existential issues, require more philosophy and less psychology. So where you put the demarcation, what's the criteria of demarcation is still problematic for me. And that's the essence of my presentation, because this is a question for me also. Where will we put the mark? That's the as far as the first comment is concerned. Second, is philosophy counseling purely cognitive? I think no. That's why I have shown the cognitive triangle, CBT triangle. That's feeling, thought, and behavior. There is an interrelation. What's apparently materialistic, the problem may be highly intellectual. Cases. So, not means the way the problem is presented may not be cognitive, but the problem may be cognitive. There is again a case. I just mentioned that a boy wanted to get admitted in a hospital and he rejected. My mother took him to me. We had almost 3 hours talk. Everything was existential issues. They have taken me to all the philosophy what I studied. And after 2 hours, he just went and got admitted in the hospital. And is this rejection of his problem? Is it an intellectual one? Apparently, but it was. Because only through that discussion, he came to this world. And before that, he was in some other world. So to accept that reality, sometimes the problem may be cognitive or intellectual, but the way it is presented may be something purely materialistic or purely mundane problem. So I think there is an interrelation. Again, the problem of demarcation is difficult.
All right. Another question by Jeevan Singh. My question is that what is the difference between philosophical counseling and psychological counseling? Again, the same. And Naresh GB, he asks, how can we improve our self-image? Is there some counseling for this?
Yes.
Self-image. How can we improve on our self-image?
No, I prefer not to. There are methods, there are techniques, but I prefer not to answer this question because there is no. It's not that for fever paracetamol. So for self-image, this. I think that leads to an incorrect understanding of the process of counseling. I told even though the self-image is the problem, it can be caused out of many underlying problems. So without studying the client, we cannot, there is no prescription, we cannot suggest any solution. There are, but why the problem of self-image created is the first question. And if you can address that, the solution is there. Otherwise, there is no one-to-one problem solution relationship in counseling.
It doesn't. Right. Thank you so much. I would now like to invite Ishwar Singh Ghost. He wanted to ask something about the hermeneutics of Ishwar, are you there?
I too want to ask a question.
Alok ji, you have to wait. There are many people in the have already asked their question. Just a second, I'll read his question because I think he's probably left. What specific role the conceptual analysis and hermeneutics play in the counseling? One link is visible in cognitive behavioral therapy. What about the other link? That is his question.
No, in all sorts of therapies, the hermeneutic role is there. But in cognitive behavioral therapy, it's mostly used on reasoning only. Everywhere, where you address emotion also, there is reason. That's why the whole problem with me is that of compartmentalization. Now, compartmentalization is possible. Everything is there. So I think that's why I told, it's from my own experience, the counseling, the attending a client is like meditating upon it. So the solution comes. It's from a somewhat ideal point of view. But in actual case, it may differ. We use intellect also in that case. But everywhere, in order to as far as my understanding is concerned, we need to the client needs to understand reality and accept it. And the hurdle may be emotional. If you take out the emotional element, the client sees the right way. If the client hurdle is intellectual, then we have to handle it like that. But the ability is there. That's what I want to say.
Right. Bharat ji, are you there? I can
Hello.
see you if you have touched yourself. Yeah.
Hello.
Yeah. Hanji, go ahead, Bharat. Dr. Bharat Patel. Yeah.
Okay. Namaskar, sir. I have got three questions.
Alok ji, kindly mute yourself. Alok ji, just for a minute, kindly mute yourself.
Yeah. Okay. Sir, I have got three questions.
Okay.
First of all, while referring to meditation, you have mentioned that you have defined meditation. So I just want to know how exactly do you define meditation? This is my first question. And second one is that while referring to meditation, you have mentioned it as emptying of mind. Now, here comes a very pragmatic question. Can emptying of mind is feasible, as this is contradiction in terms itself? And the third one is emptying of mind and meditation are the same? Please kindly shed some light on it.
Okay. First of all, defining meditation. What I will see is that it's an non-judgmental perception. Is meditation. That's here, in this case, my definition of meditation. It may vary in context. It's a non-judgmental perception. And as far as the emptying of mind is concerned, it's a stage in which means towards meditation. It's not the final. As well as means if you give a breathing exercise in the sense where if you want to calm the client, you ask the client to take a deep breath, hold it slowly, exhale, then slowly inhale, hold it, exhale. And we'll suggest that the suggestion also works much. That all your positive energy is breathed in, the holding it, negative is going out. That will empty some sort of tensions. And if you purely practice meditation, then there is no problem. There's no problem left if you are able to practice meditation in its full sense. But what I told as emptying of mind is a path to get out of this anxiety, mainly.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Yeah. So we have another question. It's by Lalan. You know him well.
Yes. He
Lalan,
has left the meeting. He put some comment later on.
I think he is left. Okay, I'll ask his question. Where do you place the turnaround in life of R.D. Laing? He started as a psychoanalyst, but upside down in the later part of his life and writings, including Politics of Experiment. Would you like to respond?
No, I'm not aware of that later part, so I cannot respond.
You can skip.
I studied Laing and I studied in the anti-psychiatry movement.
Yeah.
I don't know much about that. The later
All right. Yeah. So we take up another question. Let me just see. Anurima, are you here? If you wish to ask yourself.
Yes, sure.
Please go ahead.
Okay. Good evening, sir. I'm Anurima Bhattacharya from the University of North Bengal. Firstly, I do not have the confusion regarding psychological counseling and philosophical counseling. Before the start of this lecture, actually, I also expected something that maybe the two things are confusing, but you had a very clear presentation. So that philosophical counseling to me, right from the beginning when you started with self-transformation or self-realization, these terms
it's not clear for me.
Very psychological counseling. But the point is that there are very many essential marks. Sorry, sir. Hello? Can you hear me? Am I audible?
Not clear, not that clear.
Hello?
I think your voice is not very
Hello?
clear. Anurima, your voice is not clear. Shall I read?
Hello? Hello? Yes, sure. Sure,
Okay.
You can read.
All right. Rajeevan ji, the question is, do you agree that philosophical counseling is limited in its application in the sense that both the client and the counselor has to have very many essential marks to be eligible for being part of the process? Please clarify who can be a probable aspirant for philosophical counseling, or when can a person feel the need of having philosophical counseling?
Okay, this is my problem also. So the problem is that asking a philosophical question or a confusion, clearing a philosophical confusion is just clearing a doubt. We can bring it to the realm of counseling only if it affects the person's everyday life or routine or something like that. It makes some trouble, or it ends up in some trouble. So in that case, mostly we have, as the earlier presentation, Professor Rand mentioned, that's about meaning of life when such questions. What traditionally the psychologists addressed as existential issues and related issues. Okay. If that comes, then philosophical counseling or philosophy, rather than philosophical counseling, I would like to say philosophy, you require more philosophical elements there than psychology. Even the Rambo can come, which is purely psychological, what I believe. So, again, I would like to say that a compartmentalization is difficult because only with a personal attachment that even you can transform the client in terms of existential crisis. So, again, I would like to say that the compartmentalization is difficult for me. But if it's philosophical counseling, then both the clients and the counselor must have a good rationality as well as knowledge of many other realms. Then only this can work out.
Right.
So can we consider that philosophical counseling has its limitations in the application?
Definitely. I mentioned some 5 or 6 techniques, counseling techniques that are broader in a broader sense. But there are hundreds of counseling techniques, and each and every technique has got its own limit as well as its own scope.
Hello?
Am I audible? Am I audible?
You are.
Hello?
So, each and every counseling technique or tool has got its own scope and limit. And so is philosophical counseling also. Because you cannot solve every problem with pure philosophy. So there is limitation, but there are scope also. That's my response to that.
Right. So we can take the last question. That's Dr. Arun Garg. If you're here, Arun, you can ask your question directly, or you want me to read it?
Thank you, ma'am. Good evening, everyone. Thank you, Rajeevan sir, for a very extensive and very insightful lecture. Actually, I've already answered the first part of my question, that is the fundamental difference between psychological and philosophical counseling. The second part of the question was regarding the word counseling itself. The word counseling has a very psychological undertones, and then whenever we use the word counseling, people assume that it is something to do with the psychological realm. So do you have in mind a different word, or do you think there is a need for a different word in place of counseling so that there is no confusion between the two techniques? Thank you.
Okay. I don't have any different word. And even though there is a psychological overtone, if you search for counseling, see Wikipedia, I searched it some 3 years back. There are some 30 plus counseling, like marriage counseling, biblical counseling, like that. So counseling and career counseling, like that, there are some 32 or more listed in Wikipedia. So there are many counselings. But what should be my concern is not about strengthening philosophical counseling, to be frank, even from the background of philosophy. My concern is strengthening both. philosophical counseling with psychological tools and psychological counseling with philosophical insights. So either we have to find another word or use the same word with different sense is our choice. Because I use these techniques, many of these,
Thank you.
without knowing that these are used in some areas of psychology. I use many techniques from my learnings in philosophy. Because whatever I...
Just a second, Alokji.
Okay.
Let him just complete his question. Please go
Shall
ahead, Arun. Yeah.
Shall I complete?
Yeah.
There was it was an advice given by the previous speaker in the last lecture that we cannot practice counseling, philosophical counseling in India, because it is or anywhere in the world in that sense, because it is governed by certain statutes and certain regulations. So if we use the word philosophical counseling, are we putting ourselves in a position where we are not allowed to maybe practice, or we are maybe not on the right side of the law or the rules in any sense? Do you have any faced any problem like that?
I'll just tell my problem again. Okay, that's as far as the person, as far to the best of my knowledge, now for practicing counseling, there is no rigid guidelines in India. But if you want to take clinical cases, if you want to put on board as clinical psychologist, then you have to take an MPhil in psychology from RCA recognized institutions, Rehabilitation Council of India recognized institutions. But my concern really is, if you put a board that you are a philosophical counselor, who is going to come to you for counseling? That's a practical question. So will it not appear as a means clearing of doubt? Otherwise, that trend must go on in our society. But I think as of now, many people from the field of philosophy themselves never heard of philosophical counseling.
That's
how can we expect public to come to a philosophical counselor? People come approach someone when they have got some problem. And my contention is that problem cannot be classified into philosophy or psychology. It's a sort of suffering. That's all.
all right. Second and last question by Alokji, and from our student. She'll be the last. Alokji, go ahead, please.
Okay, thanks, Shivani ji. Thank you very much, Professor, for removing the blurred line between psychological counseling and philosophical counseling. That was a good thing in your presentation. I liked it. But what I did not like is the so much emphasis on Indian perspective of counseling. Now, the major question for me, and I ask you, is that and it can be related to what Shivani ji said in the end, and what Lalan wanted to say also. That is not counseling leading to an acceptance of reality as it is. Reality here I am using in social reality sense. If a person is suffering due to the atrocities of the caste system and is depressed, a lady who is suffering because of the patriarchal atrocities and going into depression, can a counseling solve the problem, or only the problem will be solved only with the changing of the social reality? So the critique of counseling, in a sense, that it tries to adjust oneself to that unjust society, hierarchical society, a suppressive dominant society. It is not leading to any change in that, and this talk of liberation and enlightenment is just an escape from the changing of social reality, and that is the social revolution itself. Thank you.
I think we'll be lost if Alokji was not permitted to ask the question. It's a wonderful question, excellent question. There's no doubt in that. And I'm not emphasized Indian philosophy or some of the religions to make clear. Emphasize the wisdom, Eastern wisdom prevailing in the Eastern countries, including China, Japan, and all. That's Zen and all I have referred to. And this question is significant, very important, because in today's society, I know all of these concerns, whether it's caste system or any sort of marginalization or like that issues. What's happening is that the problem social reality is a problem, there is no doubt. Before explaining further, I'll just speak about a prayer which is known as serenity prayer. It goes like this: God, give me the serenity to accept the things which I cannot change, the courage to change the things which I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. There are some realities which you cannot change. Accept it. There are some realities which you can change. Have the courage to change it. Know the difference. My beard, as I told you, is a reality which cannot be changed. Accept it. But I don't consider social reality to be one like that. But the problem with one of the problems which is to be addressed in current social scenario is that those who are fighting social inequalities or social evils are suffering from that evil itself. I mean to say that something like a distant spectator, they are not able to act like that. If we accept that social reality as social reality, and if we can have a detached fighting of that reality, we could have done much better than what's done in today's society. That's what I believe. Because we are totally...
Shivani has some objection about that, first of all.
Okay. Means we are totally involved in that and we take it as an emotional issue and fight against that. We must fight. But can you just detach the problem for time being and fight? I think it can give better results. It can empower you to fight without having much changes. That's my response to this. And people can have individual choices.
I think Rajeevan, I totally disagree with you because you see, somehow you deem to think that there are realities in this country, in this world, which cannot be changed at all. No. See, maybe a very, very frankly speaking, very pertinent question was asked by Alokji. Okay, there are social evils in this country. Okay, there are, religious evils also in this country. Therefore, the thing is that there are things which can be changed. Of course, has to be changed. Okay, therefore, if you are taking a detached level, that is more theological rather. That we have been suffering from this problem for the last many years. Number one. Now, I have another question for you. My question is that you have been talking about the emptying of the mind, meditation. Okay. Maitreya Upanishad, there is a beautiful question is there. What is the highest quality of mind? And the Rishi says that the highest quality of mind is mindlessness. Okay. So to come to that level of mindlessness, okay, I think we have to come to the state of samadhi. The highest samadhi. Okay. So there also you talked about the so-called concept of self-actualization. Don't you think that self-actualization is actually, or maybe the so-called the Socratic wisdom, this is your thought, know thyself. All these are actually what to say. Once I know myself fully, entirely, then of course there's nothing to be known. Okay. But my question is that, but my point is that I myself do not know as to what I am or who I am. And this is the problem, of course, that Ramana Maharshi also has been talking about. Okay, self-actualization. Once I know about my own self in its entirety, in its plenum, okay, that's what. Now, the question is that I should say, see, maybe I would like to make a, maybe a comment. I mean, if you don't mind. My comment is that for the last 30, 40 years, philosophers have been marginalized day by day, in the sense that the departments or everywhere. Okay. Now we wanted to have some kind of an, upper hand. So we are. Do you think that we are inventing new terms like what to say, philosophical counseling, so that to state our existence? I mean, this is very, very. I mean, not a serious question, but of course, I think a jovial question. Please, thank you so much.
Okay, I'm happy that my guide commented. I was waiting. I decided probably. Sabanzar is my first guide. Okay, I could not complete from Panjab University. And actually, I was not telling that there are social evils which cannot be changed. No. All the evils that's happening in today in our country must be addressed. But how we should approach it, that's the problem. Whether we should approach with an emotional burden, that's the question. That's up to you. Okay. And they are each and every individual in the country is not counseled. If they come to counsel and when they approach a counselor, when their act itself is a problem for them. And if they come to a counselor, then probably the counselor will say that do the same thing but with a different emotional attachment. That's what my point. And as far as the Socratic wisdom is concerned, I fully agree with you. Because I was just trying to bring out the elements of philosophy in the existing tradition. So I told that my presentation is not exhaustive.
I agree with you. I really congratulate you. Really, wonderful. I agree with you. But I have one.
And the
last one comment for me. See, once you go back to the Indian philosophy in general, especially Upanishads in particular, I can talk about Brahadaratya, Aitreya, Taittiriya, Shvedashudra, and well, you can see the Rishis, Yajnavalkya, Uttara Aruni, Prahakan Jaivili, Kaikeya. They all have been doing so-called counseling only, in fact, no? I mean, I would say that, no? We have this technique maybe some 3,000 years back. Maybe the Western people discovered the story only very recently, based on 30 years back. So I am saying that, no? We have people like Uttara Aruni, for instance, Yajnavalkya, for instance, Prahakan Jaivili, and Kaikeya. And there are many others, in fact. Of course, if you go to the 13 principles of Upanishad, you will come to know about the people. So I am saying that we have had this philosophical counseling, whatever it may be. Okay, it was there since 3,000 years. Okay, so now maybe the Western philosophers they have invented a new term, philosophical counseling. I mean, therefore, let us not become just a prey to them. That's all. But anyway, I'm extremely thankful to you. So brilliant presentation. Wonderful, my own student. Wonderful plans. Congratulations.
I agree that the philosophical counseling existed in a social system. Now the system has lost its structure. Now it's no more in practice. So we had to make it as a separate discipline. So, and the Westerners started it. You can show that it's already existed here. And you are born knowingly or unknowingly. Maybe unknowingly, I'm not telling. But we had that wisdom and we have been using it in our culture. And we can also build up a system which our society demands. I've seen in a lecture I've seen by one of the psychologists from our own country. They are telling that the start speaking by the age of 3 or 4. What is the case in India? Here, the child starts by the age of 1. Where they are separated from the parents, they get less attention, they start learning. So why should we take everything from the Western? Why can't we develop it here? Why can't we use our own insight, which is matching for our culture? That's what my question. And another thing is that we require some support from knowledge of psychology also. Otherwise, we'll be troubling someone else's life. So that's my concern. And I express my thanks to all those who have listened.
One last question, which is very interesting, I think, that is from our student, Satvant. She's asking you that about the termination part of the counseling that you were just submitting in the last, that she wants to ask that since the counselor meets so many number of patients or clients, does it happen so that in the subconscious mind of the counselor, he carries away the problems of the impressions of the problems that clients have shared?
If he's a good counselor, the answer is no.
Acha.
The thing is that what's the difference between if a problem is described, say abuse is described, the client is describing by crying. The client may describe it by crying. The counselor will feel all the counselor can experience through empathy all those emotions, but the counselor will not. And that helps the counselor to rationally understand the client stage. And from there, that's the difference between the client's understanding of the problem and the counselor's understanding of the problem. And if the counselor has got some other personality issues, like what we call unfinished businesses, then this thing can happen. He may carry the issues of the session.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Dr. Rajeevan. It was wonderful having you with us. I think that I presumed it so right in the beginning that we will be left enlightened and enriched. It was a lucid presentation with, jotted points and elaboration of every point with reference to the case studies, which made it more interesting and more accessible. And I think our students, our participants must be feeling thankful and grateful with regard to this understanding of philosophical counseling. We really are thankful and for taking out time, and I am also thankful, deeply grateful to the participants for taking out time to attend this webinar on Elenchus, the study circle that we run. And I'm also thankful to my core team, Piyush Parimoo and Akshat, for helping me out every time I plan to organize this session on study circle. And I am also deeply thankful to my friends, my colleagues for lending me their support and all encouragement from their side. I'm really thankful. And I hope to see you again, Rajeevan ji, next time and many more times. We are yet to finish this task and hope to see you around again. So thank you so much. Thank you so much. All right.
Not at all. Patiently listened. Thank you.
Thank you.